Picture yourself as a young American pilot in 1965, walking toward the F-4 Phantom, 62 feet of raw power that everyone's calling the ultimate fighting machine. This technological marvel can punch through the sound barrier twice and carry enough firepower to level entire city blocks. Aviation magazines treat it like the second coming. Defense contractors are getting rich. Pentagon brass won't shut up about America's newest ace in the hole. But here's the shocking truth nobody's telling you as you climb into that cockpit. This incredible machine is hiding a deadly secret that's about to turn Vietnam's skies into a nightmare. The F-4 Phantom's greatest enemy isn't waiting in some North Vietnamese airfield or hiding in those Soviet MiGs everyone fears. It's built right into the airplane you're trusting with your life. What you're about to discover will shatter everything you probably thought you knew about military aviation. America's most advanced fighter was systematically betraying its own pilots through design flaws so fundamentally wrong, they'll make you wonder how anyone ever approved this death trap for combat. It was 1954, and Pentagon planners made a decision that would haunt American airmen for decades. They declared dogfighting dead and buried. The future of air combat? All missiles, all the time. Close-range aerial knife fights were ancient history, as outdated as muskets or horse cavalry. Imagine sharp-suited bureaucrats sitting in windowless Pentagon rooms, convinced they'd cracked the code on modern warfare. These weren't grizzled combat veterans with mud on their boots. These were desk warriors with engineering degrees and theoretical models. They threw around fancy phrases like beyond visual range engagements and missile envelope parameters. But what they were really doing was rolling dice with lives that hadn't even been born yet. This wasn't just some new military doctrine. This was gospel truth written in stone, and it kicked off the most dangerous gamble in aviation history. But these armchair generals forgot something crucial about war. The other guy doesn't follow your playbook. Vietnamese pilots hadn't been to American war colleges. They couldn't care less about Pentagon theories. They would fight dirty, close, and however long it took to win. The F-4 Phantom was built around this completely backwards thinking. Every single choice, every corner cut, every potentially deadly decision came from one catastrophically wrong assumption. American fighters would never, ever have to mix it up close with enemy aircraft. Picture those design meetings where bean counters told engineers to forget everything except missile capability. Need to save weight? Dump the maneuverability. Want more range? Who cares if pilots can't see what's trying to kill them? The radar will handle that. They were so wrong, it almost seems criminal. Now here's where this story gets absolutely insane. The F-4 Phantom rolled off the assembly line, missing something every fighter plane had carried since the Wright brothers started strapping guns to aircraft. A gun. Not one single bullet. America's top-of-the-line air superiority fighter was utterly toothless. The Pentagon's missile-obsessed pencil pushers had literally sent their own fighter pilots to a gunfight without guns. Think about walking into a street fight with your fists superglued to your sides. That's precisely what American airmen faced over Vietnam. The guys who had to actually fly these things couldn't wrap their heads around it. They just stared at these pristine cockpits in complete bewilderment. Where's the gun sight? Where's the trigger? How exactly are we supposed to fight back when things go sideways? It's like sending a medieval knight into battle, armed only with a crossbow. No sword, no backup plan. Just hope that one shot works perfectly. The logic seemed bulletproof on paper, if you'll pardon the expression. Why waste precious space and weight on primitive guns when you've got these incredible Sparrow and Sidewinder missiles? These technological wonders could supposedly vaporize enemy planes from miles away. The number crunchers had it all figured out. Each 20mm cannon shell weighed 3.5 ounces, times 640 rounds, plus the gun itself, and you're looking at nearly a ton that could be used for more missiles, extra fuel, or fancier electronics. What they couldn't crunch numbers on was the psychological punch of going into mortal combat without the most basic weapon imaginable. Fighting without a gun felt like showing up naked to a knife fight. It went against every warrior instinct developed over thousands of years of human conflict. Vietnam was about to teach them that the old ways sometimes exist for good reasons. The AIM-7 Sparrow missile was supposed to be the F-4's ace in the hole. It looked revolutionary on paper, a radar-guided death sentence that could nail targets from beyond visual range. In actual combat, it was basically a costly way to commit suicide. Picture this supposed wonder weapon: 8 feet of sleek destruction, weighing 500 pounds, stuffed with electronics that cost more than most people's houses. It looked like it came straight out of a Buck Rogers movie, all chrome and fins, and deadly promise. The Sparrow's real-world success rate in Vietnam, a pathetic 8 to 10%. 9 times out of 10, these million-dollar marvels would either miss completely, blow up too early, or just refuse to explode at all. But the real nightmare wasn't just the failure rate. The Sparrow had this absolutely insane requirement. The F-4 had to keep its radar locked onto the target until the missile actually hit. That meant flying straight as an arrow for those crucial seconds, while the enemy could dance around however he wanted. Think about how completely backwards this is. You're screaming through a hostile sky at 600 miles per hour, enemy fighters swarming everywhere, and your own weapon system forces you to fly like you're on train tracks. No dodging, no weaving, no defensive moves whatsoever. Just fly straight, pray your missile works, and hope the bad guys don't nail you before your weapon reaches them. Vietnamese pilots caught on to this lunacy faster than you can imagine. They'd spot that telltale radar signature of an incoming Sparrow, then pull every G-force crushing maneuver in the book. While at it, the poor Phantom crew flew their predictable suicide course, completely helpless to defend themselves. It was like making a bullfighter stand perfectly still while the bull charges. The F-4's cockpit design had another killer flaw that somehow slipped past every aerospace engineer involved. This fighter had blind spots so massive they made situational awareness practically impossible. Thick canopy frames, bulky ejection seats, and terrible rear visibility turned this supposed air superiority fighter into a flying blind spot. Pilots couldn't see threats coming from behind or below, exactly where Vietnamese MiGs loved to attack from. Imagine trying to drive your car through rush hour traffic with steel beams welded across half your windshield and all your mirrors painted black. Now picture doing that at 500 miles per hour while armed enemies are actively trying to kill you. The pilot's seat was positioned perfectly for seeing straight ahead. Fantastic if you're flying a passenger jet, absolutely deadly if you're trying to fight for your life. The airplane's structure created these massive blind zones that enemy pilots could hide in like shadows in a dark alley. The guy in the back seat, the radar intercept officer, had it even worse. He spent the whole flight facing forward, surrounded by glowing electronic displays, with basically zero ability to spot anything trying to shoot them down. 2 guys in a fighter plane, and neither one could effectively watch their own back. Vietnamese MiG pilots figured out these blind spots better than the Americans who flew the damn things. They studied captured gun camera footage, interrogated downed airmen, and learned to attack from exactly the angles where Phantom crews literally could not see them coming. This wasn't just uncomfortable, It was a death sentence, waiting to happen. In air-to-air combat, whoever spots the threat first usually gets to go home that night. Whoever doesn't gets to be a statistic. Pentagon planners went overboard, cramming the F-4 with every advanced gadget they could dream up. Sophisticated radar systems, mind-bendingly complex fire control computers, multiple types of missiles, electronic countermeasures, you name it, they bolted it on. The cockpit ended up looking like something NASA would use to launch rockets to Mars. Hundreds of switches, dozens of blinking warning lights, multiple radar screens, and control panels that needed a PhD in electrical engineering just to understand. The result? A fighter so complicated that it needed 2 highly trained crew members just to operate the basic systems. Here's the twisted irony. All that complexity was supposed to make things easier for the crew. Engineers genuinely believed they were giving pilots superhuman abilities. Instead, they created technological quicksand that swallowed combat awareness and spat out deadly confusion. Just the radar alone had 47 different operating modes. A pilot had to pick the right mode for whatever tactical situation was unfolding, adjust power settings, manage tracking parameters, and coordinate with his backseater, all while screaming through hostile airspace at twice the speed of sound. But here's what killed people. Complexity became the enemy of staying alive. In the world of aerial combat, pilots needed simple, reliable systems they could work without thinking. Instead, they got a technological nightmare that demanded conscious thought for the most basic functions. Meanwhile, in their simple MiG-17 and MiG-21s, Vietnamese pilots had just what they needed to win: trigger, gun sight, and crystal-clear visibility. When they spotted an American fighter, they simply pointed and shot. No complicated procedures, no systems management, just pure, deadly simplicity. Each of the F-4's design disasters might have been survivable on its own, but together they created a perfect storm of dysfunction that turned America's most advanced fighter into a death trap. No guns meant pilots had to rely on missiles that barely worked. Terrible visibility made it impossible to spot threats until they were already shooting. Mind-numbingly complex systems distracted crews from the basic job of staying alive. All that extra weight made the plane handle like a flying refrigerator. When Vietnamese MiGs closed in for visual range combat, which happened constantly, F-4 pilots found themselves in aerial knife fights, armed with nothing but broken promises and fancy electronics. The numbers don't lie, and they're more shocking than Hollywood fiction. In the early years of Vietnam, American fighter aircraft were being shot down at rates that would have ended careers and triggered congressional investigations in peacetime. The F-4, despite its technological sophistication, was suffering losses that defied explanation. Here's the statistic that should make your blood run cold. In 1965, the United States was losing 1 aircraft for every 2 enemy planes shot down. But you know what? The raw numbers only tell part of the horror story. Behind each lost F-4 were 2 crew members, men with families, dreams, and futures that ended in the jungles of Southeast Asia. Each smoking crater represented millions of dollars in taxpayer investment and irreplaceable human life. The kill ratios told the whole story. American pilots, who should have dominated the skies with advanced technology, were often lucky to break even in aerial combat. The Pentagon's response? Deny, deflect, and classify the embarrassing truth. By 1968, the evidence was undeniable. American air superiority, the foundation of military doctrine since World War II, was crumbling over the skies of Vietnam. Picture the scene in Pentagon briefing rooms, generals staring at charts that showed the impossible. Their most advanced fighters were being systematically destroyed by an enemy using obsolete tactics and ancient aircraft. Every month brought new casualty reports that couldn't be explained away by bad luck or enemy skill. Pentagon officials faced a choice: admit their fundamental assumptions were wrong, or watch American pilots die for technological pride. The breaking point came when statistical analysis revealed the horrifying truth. American fighter pilots were no longer achieving air superiority. They were barely surviving. The F-4, which was supposed to dominate the skies, had become a target-rich environment for enemy fighters. But you can't argue with body bags. You can't spin casualty reports. You can't classify the screams of pilots going down over enemy territory. F-4 squadrons were suffering losses that threatened to ground the entire air campaign. Senior commanders started asking uncomfortable questions. If the F-4 was so advanced, why were pilots dying? If American technology was superior, why were Korean War-era MiGs winning dogfights? Something had to change, or American air power would collapse entirely.
In a move that would have been unthinkable just years before, the US Air Force quietly began relearning how to dogfight. The world's most technologically advanced military admitting they'd forgotten the basics of aerial combat. Decades of technological superiority had made them soft, utterly dependent on gadgets instead of actual fighting skills. These programs started in secret. Small groups of experienced pilots began teaching basic air combat maneuvers that had been written off as ancient history. Turn rates, energy management, and visual target identification, skills systematically purged from pilot training because missiles were supposed to make them obsolete. These weren't just training exercises. These were survival courses. Pilots were learning that staying alive meant forgetting everything the Pentagon had taught them about modern air combat. The Navy created what became legendary as Top Gun, an intensive combat school that taught pilots how to fight effectively despite their aircraft's crippling limitations. At Top Gun, instructors didn't pretend the F-4 was some perfect fighting machine. They acknowledged its flaws and taught pilots how to stay alive despite them. Students learned to maximize their aircraft's few strengths, speed and climb rate, while avoiding turning fights where MiGs held every advantage. Now onto the truth that most military historians gloss over, or should I say ignore entirely. The F-4 Phantom II, supposedly one of the most successful fighter aircraft in aviation history, was fundamentally broken from the very day it first left the ground. Think about that mind-bending contradiction for a second. An aircraft that served with distinction for over 4 decades was operated by 12 different air forces around the world and saw combat in more conflicts than any other jet fighter in history. And it was fundamentally screwed up from day one. The F-4's success had nothing to do with superior design. It succeeded because human courage and adaptability overcame technological arrogance and bureaucratic stupidity. Pilots didn't win because of their aircraft. They won despite it. The F-4's design perfectly reflected Pentagon groupthink, putting theoretical performance numbers over combat reality. It embodied everything wrong with committee-designed weapons systems, where political considerations and contractor profits outweighed what actually worked in combat. The brilliant engineers who designed the F-4 weren't evil people. They genuinely thought they were creating the ultimate fighter aircraft. They obsessed over statistics that looked fantastic in congressional hearings: maximum speed, service ceiling, payload capacity, operational range. They completely forgot about the human beings who would have to fight and potentially die in their creation. The F-4 succeeded despite itself, not because of brilliant design.
It survived Vietnam through the skill and raw courage of pilots who learned to overcome their aircraft's crippling limitations. It was through their superior training, tactical innovation, and sheer determination not to die. Every successful F-4 mission was ultimately a testament to human adaptability. Pilots took an aircraft designed for a war that didn't exist and somehow made it work in the war they had to fight. The real enemy was never Vietnamese pilots or Soviet technology. It was American arrogance and the dangerous fantasy that complex technology could somehow replace fundamental combat principles that had been proven in blood for thousands of years. The world's most advanced radar was completely useless if you couldn't see the enemy sneaking up behind you. The most sophisticated missile system would be worthless if it didn't work when you pulled the trigger. The fastest fighter in the sky was just an expensive coffin if it couldn't turn with the enemy when the missiles inevitably failed. The F-4 Phantom's story is ultimately a very human story of courage overcoming incompetence, skill triumphing over flawed systems, and pilots who absolutely refused to die for other people's catastrophic mistakes.
Ready to uncover more shocking military secrets that official histories won't tell you? Hit that like button and subscribe if this opened your eyes to the real story behind military aviation. The truth is always more shocking than fiction, and there's so much more to discover.